For 165 million years, carnivorous dinosaurs ruled this planet, from the first small killers of the Triassic to the bone-crushing titans of the Cretaceous. Every era produced predators more terrifying than the last. Today, I'm breaking down every major predator in dinosaur history, what made them deadly, and why they dominated, starting with the one that proved the whole concept could work: Herrerasaurus. 231 million years ago, in what is now Argentina, a predator was already winning. Herrerasaurus wasn't massive, 6 meters long, roughly 350 kilograms, but here's the thing, it didn't need to be massive. It was hunting in a world still dominated by non-dinosaurian reptiles, crocodile-line archosaurs, and other creatures that would go extinct long before the age of dinosaurs truly began. Herrerasaurus outlasted them all, and the blueprint was already there. 3 functional fingers, an S-shaped neck built for striking, serrated teeth designed to slice through flesh. Every single anatomical feature that would define carnivorous dinosaurs for the next 160 million years was already assembled in this one animal. Here's where it gets interesting. Paleontologists still can't agree on what Herrerasaurus actually is. Some classify it as a true theropod, others argue it sits outside that group entirely, representing an early Saurischian that predates the formal theropod split. Its exact placement on the family tree challenges how we define dinosaur classification itself, but that's exactly what makes it so important. Herrerasaurus was the proof of concept, the evolutionary test run that showed the theropod body plan could compete and win. Every predator that came after owes something to this animal. But if Herrerasaurus was the prototype, the next predator on our list took that design and added something nobody expected: Dilophosaurus. Let's get this out of the way. The Jurassic Park version of Dilophosaurus is basically fan fiction. No venom glands, no neck frill, and the real animal was 7 to 8 meters long, so good luck fitting that inside a Jeep window. Spielberg created one of the most iconic movie monsters ever, but it has essentially zero scientific basis. Now here's what makes the real Dilophosaurus genuinely fascinating. This was a large predator living in the early Jurassic, around 193 to 183 million years ago, weighing up to 500 kilograms, but it wasn't an apex killer. Evidence suggests it specialized in fish and small vertebrates. A 500 kilogram animal choosing to eat fish instead of dominating everything around it, that's a weird evolutionary choice, and it tells you something important about how complex these early ecosystems actually were. Then there are those twin crests. They look like weapons, but the bone is paper thin, one solid impact and they'd shatter. They were almost certainly display structures used for species recognition or attracting mates. Which means Dilophosaurus had social complexity that most people don't associate with dinosaurs this old. It wasn't just hunting, it was communicating. But if you think a fish-eating show-off is impressive, wait until you meet the animal that dominated the late Jurassic for over 10 million years, Allosaurus. Most predators on this list had their moment. Allosaurus had 10 million years of moments. From 155 to 145 million years ago, this animal owned the Morrison Formation across North America, and nothing came close to dethroning it. That's not a reign, that's a dynasty. First named in 1877 by Othniel Charles Marsh right in the heat of the Bone Wars, Allosaurus went on to become one of the most abundantly recovered large theropods in North American fossil history. And when you look at the anatomy, you understand why it lasted so long. At 8.5 to 9.7 meters long and up to 2,200 kilograms, it wasn't the biggest predator ever. But it was built with surgical precision. Its eyes sat more laterally on the skull, giving it a wide field of view with only limited binocular overlap, roughly 20 degrees compared to a Tyrannosaur's 55. What it lost in depth perception, it gained in peripheral awareness. Laterally compressed teeth worked like steak knives, slicing through flesh rather than crushing bone. A low-profile skull kept it aerodynamic. This was a pursuit predator capable of hitting 21 miles per hour, fast enough to run down virtually anything alive in the late Jurassic. But here's where it gets interesting. Bone beds like the Cleveland Lloyd Quarry contain dozens of Allosaurus individuals preserved right alongside herbivore remains. Some paleontologists have floated the idea that these animals hunted in groups, but the dominant explanation is actually grimmer. These sites were likely predators predator traps, places where stuck or dying herbivores lured in one Allosaurus after another, each one getting trapped in turn. Not coordinated pack hunting, a death spiral of individual greed, that reframes everything in a different way. You're not looking at a tactical unit, you're looking at an apex predator so relentlessly aggressive that it would charge into a death trap for a meal. Not bad for a dinosaur most people consider boring. But speaking of Jurassic predators living in its shadow, let's talk about one with a horn on its face. Darwin's Ceratosaurus. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Ceratosaurus lived in the exact same time and place as Allosaurus. Same formation, same era, same hunting grounds, two massive predators sharing one landscape for millions of years, and neither one wiped the other out. That alone should tell you something interesting was going on. At around 5.5 to 6 meters long and roughly 550 to 700 kilograms, Ceratosaurus was significantly smaller than Allosaurus. But size wasn't what kept it in the game. Strategy was. Ceratosaurus had longer, more blade-like teeth proportional to its skull, built for slicing and tearing rather than the hatchet-style attacks Allosaurus used. Completely different feeding approach. While Allosaurus was slamming its jaws down like an axe into large prey, Ceratosaurus was likely targeting smaller or different prey entirely. That kind of niche partitioning is likely the reason both predators coexisted without one driving the other to extinction. But here's where it gets really interesting. That iconic nasal horn and those paired brow ridges weren't just for show. Pathological bone lesions found on multiple specimens tell us these animals were getting into violent encounters with each other, not with prey, with their own kind. Ritualized combat for territory or mates, horned theropods slamming into each other like prehistoric rams, that's a level of social behavior most people never associate with Jurassic predators. And this wasn't some isolated regional animal either. Specimens have been recovered from both the Morrison Formation in North America and Portugal, making Ceratosaurus one of the more cosmopolitan theropods of its era. But if you think a horn-clashing Jurassic predator is impressive, wait until you meet the one that abandoned land entirely, Spinosaurus. For decades, everyone thought they had Spinosaurus figured out, a massive terrestrial predator bigger than T-Rex, capable of taking down anything on land. Jurassic Park 3 even showed it snapping a Tyrannosaurus Rex's neck like it was nothing. Cool scene. Completely wrong animal. Here's the thing. Spinosaurus was never built for that fight. It wasn't even built for land. At 15 to 17 meters long and potentially 7,000 kilograms, Spinosaurus is the longest predatory dinosaur ever documented, longer than T-Rex. But that size wasn't designed for chasing down hadrosaurs or wrestling ceratopsians. It was designed for water. Between 2014 and 2020, a series of discoveries completely rewired everything we thought we knew. Paddle-like tail built for propulsion through rivers, dense bones that controlled buoyancy the same way a modern manatees do, conical teeth shaped for gripping slippery fish, not slicing through muscle, nasal openings positioned high on the skull so it could breathe while partially submerged. Every single adaptation pointed to the same conclusion. Spinosaurus was semi-aquatic, the first dinosaur ever confirmed to be, and people lost their minds. Enthusiasts who'd spent years building their mental image around a terrestrial colossus pushed back hard, but the evidence was overwhelming. What makes this even more painful is that we could have known sooner. The first Spinosaurus fossils were collected in Egypt in 1912, and Ernst Stromer formally named the species in 1915. Those original bones were destroyed in 1944 when Allied bombs hit the Munich Museum. Decades of potential research gone in a single night. One of paleontology's greatest losses, Spinosaurus wasn't competing with land predators at all. It occupied ecological space closer to a modern saltwater crocodile than a lion. But if you want a predator that actually was competing for terrestrial supremacy and winning, wait until you hear about Giganotosaurus. Giganotosaurus. This is the predator that existed because its prey was literally the size of a building. Giganotosaurus roamed Patagonia around 100 to 95 million years ago, stretching up to 13.7 meters long and weighing close to 10,000 kilograms. That makes it one of the largest land carnivores that ever lived, but here's the thing. It lived in an ecosystem alongside titanosaur sauropods like Argentinosaurus, a beast that tipped the scales at roughly 70 metric tons, with some estimates pushing closer to 80 or even higher. That's the weight of roughly 10 African elephants stacked into one animal. And that relationship wasn't a coincidence. Giganotosaurus likely evolved its massive size as a direct response to hunting enormous prey animals. The herbivores got bigger, so the predators got bigger, a biological arms race that pushed both sides to absolute extremes. But size came with a trade-off. Giganotosaurus had a proportionally smaller brain than Tyrannosaurus rex relative to body mass, which means it wasn't outsmarting anything on its own. The solution? Teamwork? Bone beds of its close relative Mapusaurus, another giant carcharodontosaurid, contain multiple individuals found alongside herbivore remains, strongly suggesting coordinated group hunting. And many paleontologists think Giganotosaurus likely employed the same strategy, less individual intelligence, more collective strategy, a completely different survival playbook than what T-Rex would use millions of years later. Now I know what you're thinking, who wins in a fight, Giganotosaurus, T-Rex? The honest answer is that matchup is paleontologically impossible. They were separated by roughly 30 million years and lived on entirely different continents. It's a fun thought experiment, but it never could have happened. What did happen though was arguably more impressive. Giganotosaurus wasn't even the only giant carnivore playing this game, because over in North Africa, something with shark-like teeth was doing the exact same thing. Carcharodontosaurus, its name literally means shark-toothed lizard, and that's not a loose comparison. When Ernst Stromer first described this animal in 1931, he looked at the teeth and immediately reached for the great white shark, because that's exactly what they looked like. Blade-like, laterally compressed, lined with microscopic serrations designed to do one thing: slice through flesh with surgical efficiency. These weren't the bone-crushing teeth of a tyrannosaur. These were cutting instruments. Every single tooth was built to process the largest animals walking the earth, specifically the massive sauropods, sharing North Africa's Cretaceous landscape between 99 and 94 million years ago. And the bite marks prove it. Sauropod bones from the same formations show repeated predation signatures matching Carcharodontosaurus tooth morphology. This animal was regularly taking down the biggest herbivores available, not scavenging. Here's where it gets complicated. At 12.5 to 13.6 meters long and up to 6,200 kilograms, Carcharodontosaurus rivals Tyrannosaurus rex in size. In some measurements, it actually exceeds it, but comparing the two is essentially meaningless. They were separated by over 10 million years and an entire ocean. Different worlds, different prey, different evolutionary pressures, and here's the kicker. Stromer's original Egyptian holotype, destroyed in a 1944 Allied bombing raid on Munich, the exact same bombing that wiped out the Spinosaurus material, two of the largest predatory dinosaurs ever discovered, both from North Africa, both erased in a single night. Everything we know now comes from Moroccan specimens recovered starting in 1995, rebuilding the picture completely from scratch. But if you think massive jaws and shark teeth are intimidating, wait until you meet a predator that traded size for a weapon far more personal: Utahraptor. Here's the thing about raptors. Everyone thinks they were small, quick little pack hunters darting between the legs of bigger, scarier dinosaurs. And for most raptors, that's accurate, but Utahraptor didn't get the memo. At 5.5 to 6.5 meters long and weighing up to 500 kilograms, this thing was the largest dromaeosaur ever discovered. That's not a raptor living in the shadow of apex predators. It is an apex predator. And then there's the claw. The sickle claw on its second toe measured 22 to 24 centimeters. centimeters. That's roughly the length of your forearm. For comparison, Velociraptor's claw looks like a letter opener next to this thing. Even Deinonychus, the raptor that literally changed paleontology, had a significantly smaller weapon. But here's where it gets fun. Utahraptor was formally named in 1993, the exact same year Jurassic Park hit theaters. Fans spent the next 3 decades correcting the film, pointing out that the movie's velociraptors were way too big. The real ones were turkey-sized, and those fans would smugly point to Utahraptor as what the raptors should have been called. Except the filmmakers likely already knew about Utahraptor during production. The oversized movie raptors weren't a mistake. They were closer to Utahraptor than to Velociraptor the entire time. The irony is genuinely perfect. Beyond the pop culture footnote, Utahraptor's powerful forelimb articulation suggests it could grapple, grip, and potentially climb. This wasn't a one-trick slasher, it had a full hunting toolkit that went well beyond simple pursuit. But if Utahraptor proved raptors could be terrifyingly large, the next predator proved that sometimes evolution strips everything away except raw, terrifying speed: Carnotaurus. Carnotaurus is the most underrated predator on this entire list, and it's not even close. While everyone argues about Tyrannosaurus rex versus Giganotosaurus, this thing was quietly running around Patagonia roughly 72 to 69 million years ago, with one of the most bizarre and fascinating body plans any theropod ever evolved. Let me explain. The name literally means meat-eating bull, and one look at the skull tells you why. 2 forward-projecting horns, each about 15 centimeters long, jutting out above the eyes. No other large theropod had anything like them. Jose Bonaparte named it in 1985, and the moment that skull was revealed, it became one of the most visually distinctive dinosaurs ever found. But here's where it gets weird: the arms. Everyone jokes about Tyrannosaurus rex having small arms, but Tyrannosaurus rex's arms were at least functional. Carnotaurus had forelimbs so reduced they couldn't even reach its own mouth. These weren't just small, they were actively vestigial. Natural selection wasn't ignoring those arms, it was deleting them. And that tells you something incredible about what was happening with the rest of the body. Everything below the waist was built for one thing: speed, exceptionally powerful hind limbs, a compressed body profile, and a lightweight frame all point to cursorial specialization. This was a pursuit predator built to chase prey down across open scrubland rather than ambush in dense forest. Isotopic evidence backs this up. Carnotaurus occupied a specific ecological niche, hunting in open environments where raw speed was the deciding factor. The horns likely weren't for killing prey either. They point to intraspecies combat or display, meaning Carnotaurus had complex social behavior on top of everything else, and yet nobody talks about it. But if you think a speed-specialized bull dinosaur is impressive, wait until you hear about the animal that literally changed how science understands dinosaurs entirely. Deinonychus. Most predators on this list earn their place by being bigger, stronger, or more terrifying than everything around them. Deinonychus earned its place by changing science itself. Let me explain. At 3 to 3.6 meters long and weighing roughly 70 to 100 kilograms, Deinonychus wasn't particularly large. It lived during the early Cretaceous, roughly 115 to 108 million years ago, across what's now the western United States. By size alone, it shouldn't even be in the same conversation as the giants we've already covered. But here's the thing. When John Ostrom formally described this animal in 1969 from specimens pulled out of Montana's Cloverleaf Formation, he didn't just name a new species, he detonated a bomb under everything paleontology thought it knew about dinosaurs. Before Deinonychus, the scientific consensus was that dinosaurs were sluggish, cold-blooded reptiles, overgrown lizards dragging their tails through swamps. Ostrom's research on this animal proved the exact opposite. Deinonychus was fast, agile, warm-blooded, and built to kill. Its signature sickle-shaped claw on each foot, the terrible claw its name translates to, wasn't decorative. It was a weapon, designed for active, aggressive predation. This single discovery essentially launched what scientists now call the dinosaur renaissance, one of the most important paradigm shifts in the history of natural science, and the behavioral evidence was just as explosive. The holotype specimen was found in direct association with Tenontosaurus remains, multiple Deinonychus skeletons alongside a single herbivore. That's one of the clearest snapshots of pack hunting behavior in the entire fossil record, predating similar evidence found for much larger theropods by decades. A mid-sized predator that rewrote the rules, but if you think rewriting science is unsettling, wait until you meet the predator that ate its own kind, Majungasaurus. Every predator on this list killed other species. This one killed its own. Majungasaurus lived between 71 and 66 million years ago on Madagascar, and at 6 to 7 meters long and up to 1,500 kilograms, it wasn't the biggest theropod ever. It didn't need to be. On an isolated island with zero competition from other large predators, Majungasaurus was the undisputed apex. Nothing challenged it, nothing came close. But here's where it gets dark. Fossilized Majungasaurus bones recovered from Madagascar bear tooth marks that match Majungasaurus teeth exactly. Not the teeth of some other predator, its own species. This isn't speculation. This isn't a theory pieced together from circumstantial evidence. This is the most direct, confirmed case of cannibalism in the dinosaur fossil record. Physical, unambiguous proof that this animal ate its own kind. And the reason why tells you more about ecosystems than it does about the dinosaur itself. Madagascar was isolated. Resources were limited and unpredictable. When food ran out, Majungasaurus didn't have the option of migrating to richer territory or switching to alternative large prey. There was nowhere else to go and nothing else big enough to eat, so it turned on the only large animal available, itself. The hemispherical bone boss on its skull and short, blunt snout suggest these animals already engaged in ritualized combat with each other, likely fighting over mates or territory. When ecological pressure spiked, that intraspecies aggression apparently escalated from dominance displays to actual predation. This wasn't some freak behavior. It was a survival strategy shaped by island isolation and resource scarcity. The environment built the cannibal, but if a predator eating its own species disturbs you, wait until we talk about the single most dominant land predator that ever existed. Tyrannosaurus rex. This is the one. The predator that needs zero introduction but deserves one anyway, because Tyrannosaurus rex isn't just the most famous dinosaur that ever lived, it's the single most documented large predatory animal in the fossil record. Over 50 specimens recovered, growth stages mapped from juvenile to full adult, bite mechanic, brain structure, feeding behavior, social interaction, all of it studied in more detail than any other theropod in history, and the numbers back up the reputation. At 13 meters long and up to 9,500 kilograms, T-Rex was already massive, but size was the least interesting thing about it. Its bite force hit approximately 8,000 to 13,400 newtons, the most powerful bite of any known terrestrial animal ever. That skull wasn't designed for slicing flesh, it was engineered for crushing bone. And it did. Regularly, coprolites packed with pulverized bone fragments confirm that T-Rex didn't just kill its prey, it consumed the skeleton. But here's what really separated it from everything else on this list: its brain. T-Rex had one of the highest brain-to-body ratios of any theropod, with enlarged olfactory lobes and expanded cognitive regions that suggest sensory discrimination and predatory intelligence rivaling modern apex predators. This wasn't a mindless brute. It could smell you before it saw you, process that information, and act on it, and the skeleton tells the rest of the story. Healed fractures, bite mark scarring from other T-Rex individuals, pathological bone remodeling across dozens of specimens. These animals lived violent lives, fighting prey, fighting each other, surviving injuries that would kill most creatures, and hunting again. Now, the scavenger debate. For decades, a single provocative hypothesis dominated public conversation, that T-Rex was primarily a scavenger. Current evidence overwhelmingly supports active apex predation, but the persistence of that argument is a perfect example of how one contrarian idea can reshape public perception for years regardless of the actual data. Here's the thing, nobody says enough. Tyrannosaurus rex didn't decline. It didn't fade. It was at absolute peak dominance when the asteroid hit 66 million years ago. 160 million years of theropod evolution, refined and perfected into the most complete apex predator the land has ever produced. And it ended not because something outcompeted it, but because a rock from space rewrote the rules of life on Earth overnight. If you enjoyed this video and want to see dinosaurs' biggest mights explained, click the video on the screen now.